Well, good evening. Looking up the course, it's the last race of the day, the C final of women's intermediate eights on the course. Like the open event yesterday, one of the hotly contested events, one of the more entertaining events certainly to watch here at British University's Championships. But as the day's racing draws to a close, it's a chance for me to do episode 3 of this YouTube phenomenon, yet to be seen experiment of the rowing notebook, bringing you something unscripted, but there is a notebook, a real notebook this time, not just a YouTube, an iPad, full of notes, because that didn't work too well, but a completely unscripted canter through the events of day 3. Day 3 already. Can you believe it's day 3?
Day 3.
And everyone's looking fresh as a daisy. Day 3 of British University's Championships here at Home Fair Point in Nottingham. And you can tell that this intermediate event's reaching the closing stages because the roar is developing. This might be one of the minor finals, a C-final, but it's hotly contested. And it looks like on the near side it's the University of Bristol who are going to edge out Exeter in the closing stages. A really close run affair. And you've got a BUCS crew in there, you've got a Nottingham crew in there, you've got a Newcastle crew in there, you've also got University of Sheffield that look like they're going to cross the line in 4th place. That's not a programme which you typically associate with C-finals, let alone getting up in the top placings of the C-finals. So really, really great to see. And this is a chance for me to take you through the rest of racing from today, teasing out the main points and giving you a chance to relive some of the experiences of the day and look forward. We've got one more day of racing, and maybe some of the themes that we talk about today will be the themes that we talk about tomorrow. I'm pretty sure at least one of them will be. So, weather today, well, I'm wearing a puffer jacket, so it is not as warm as the last couple of days. It's certainly a bit darker towards the end of the day now. As we look at the course, we can actually see headlights on cars and things like that. Up until the last 45 minutes or so, the weather conditions were comparable, maybe a little bit more of a headwind. So the times in general were comparable-ish, maybe 1 or 2% slower on the day, but we weren't seeing any massive discrepancies. Winners of the events tended again to be the mid-70s. So if you're around 76%, you were winning beginner events. To win an intermediate event, you tended to be in the mid-80s. So those tended to be like 83, 84%. So probably about 1% faster generally than day 2. I think that trend was largely influenced by a very fast field in intermediate quads. I say very fast, faster in relative terms. So that tended to skew that number. And then championship, much like yesterday, mid to upper 80s was enough to see you win an event. And in general, still about 3.5% faster than intermediate peers. So championship events around 3.5% faster than intermediate events. There were 1 or 2 events where things were much closer together. I think it was women's intermediate and championship sculls. They were around about 0.7% faster. And I think that was probably reflective of a really fast sculler in the women's intermediate singles. Still very interesting to see. Fastest championship time of the day was 88% in championship quads. Slowest of the day was women's championship singles at 83.8%. I think there was a little bit more of a headwind during the women's singles, so perhaps suppress the times a little bit, and obviously smaller boats are more susceptible to headwinds than chunky, heavier quads. And in the intermediate events, the fastest time of the day, percentage-wise, was the intermediate quads in 85.9%. So only, 2.1% back on the championship event compared to 3.5% in others. So, like I was saying yesterday, with the advent of the women's intermediate quads likely in time to see the standard of that event go up, we're seeing that certainly in things like the open events, where it's quite close together at 2.5%, because they've got things like the Prince of Wales to focus on. And hopefully with the new Henley events, we're going to see that trend continue in the women's events that we saw yesterday. In general, water's pretty cold, so we're not seeing massively fast times. Right, onto the events themselves. And I am not going to be able to focus on every single crew. I'm not going to be able to even mention every single event. But I am going to try and tease out the big stuff of the day. Well, let's start off with Women's Championship 8s. The women's sweep events on Friday. Some great racing, but there was no University of London. And today we saw them in the Women's Championship and Women's Intermediate 8s. And from the time trial, all eyes were on UL. Could they convert the form which we saw in the head racing throughout the year? Could they convert that to the pace over the 2,000 metre format? Well, they had a chance to do it in the head race, in the time trial, and they certainly did that. They won the time trial by 4 seconds over Oxford Brookes. So those two crews had an automatic qualification through to the final. The remainder would be going through a repechage. One of the crews that stood out to me from that time trial, though, was Edinburgh University Boat Club. They finished third. If I've got it wrong, I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments. Don't worry, I'm sure it'll be there. But I believe they were in third. But they posted a very promising time, and I was really looking forward to seeing them in the repechage and seeing them in a final and seeing if they could convert that speed as well. They performed well at BUCS Head, which feels like a long time ago now. I always like to see that programme doing well, because I think it's important to have an under-23 programme north of the border producing talent. So on to the repechages. And it was Nottingham, so it was Cambridge that won, and then Nottingham putting in a late surge, which overtook an Imperial College crew to qualify. So Nottingham and Cambridge through to the A final from that event. The repechage number 2 was one of the races of the day. Really great to see. Superb high stakes rowing, I've written down here in my notebook. Edinburgh, the early leaders, were overtaken by Durham in, I think it was the third 500, where that Durham crew, which were rowing really well, great degree of aggression, and more kudos to not just the coaching team, but the athletes in that programme for what they're churning out. It was a great middle K to listen to, because I was listening on the bank. And then Edinburgh had a really tough battle with Newcastle in the closing 400 metres. So the Blue Star putting on a big charge. Edinburgh definitely looked like they had spent a significant amount of effort and energy in holding off that Newcastle crew. So in qualifying for the A final, I was sat there thinking to myself, they don't have days of rest. They've got a couple of hours. How much of that is going to be borne out in the final? And the final largely followed the form book. We saw UL cross the line with an 87% GMT time, followed by Brookes in Cambridge. And the Edinburgh crew, as I suspected, they looked very tired in that final 500 metres in comparison to the others. I think they will have spent a significant amount of energy to hold off a very physical Newcastle crew, and they came home in 6th position, but it was a real valiant effort. And while the men's side of the programme is definitely going through some development, the women's side of the programme at Edinburgh looking really strong as we enter the rest of the multi-lane season. I've also written in underlined physicality. That was one of the most physical events in women's rowing I've seen in a long time. That Brookes, that UL, and the Cambridge crew, the Durham crews, these women are exceptional athletes. And I think if I was sitting in one of the development programs, or I was an athlete aspiring to break into one of these programs in the future, one of the things I would be really, really thinking about is, yes, you've got to row well, but you've also got to have the engine, because if you don't have the engine, guys and girls, the engines on these athletes these days are, they are a step above where they were 5 or 10 years ago. And that's absolutely brilliant to see, that we've got, young female athletes proud of their physicality and putting it out there today to show the way in British Universities Championships. So that's championship events. And the intermediate events, really following on from yesterday, a great spectacle. You saw it just there with the last race of the day, the C final, and a determined Bristol crew taking in the win there. BUCS in the time trial, but a strong Edinburgh crew again. Edinburgh women second with just under 5 seconds back on the BUCS crew. The A final saw BUCS romp home in a final where every single crew had overlap, so it was a stonking race to watch. But interestingly, we saw Bath in second place. Bath, not a programme that we typically associate with eights rowing. I said this yesterday when the Bath men were in the B final. I think they finished 4th in the B final. They might have even finished in the top 3. But we've now got another programme in the Southwest producing strong, sweet programmes, which is absolutely brilliant. So they finished second ahead of Cambridge. UL back in 4th, so quite a big delta between the championship winning level, first boat, and the second crew. And that's not to cast any aspersions or gloom on the standard of the UL second crew, but it's just to note that top crew is where they are. So maybe I mentioned the importance of physicality. Maybe that ULB crew hitting the squat rack over the coming months. We'll see a number of them challenge potentially for that top boat. Again, a really neat looking Durham crew, and very physical on the front end, in 5th place, with the crew I fancied, Edinburgh, following the time trial, coming in 6th. So not converting the pace seen in the time trial into side-by-side for whatever reason. I'd love to say I had some insider gossip on why that might be, but I don't. So we will leave it to be determined. And I'm sure Edinburgh coaching team will be going away to determine what they can do. In the B final, it was the Newcastle University Boat Club show, valiantly holding off a very strong BUCS charge in the final 500. And again, I've underscored physicality again. So that's women's eights, intermediate and championship nailed. 2 of the blue ribboned events here. Brilliant to see. And also brilliant to see was the women's singles. We had again intermediate and championship today. Normally an event where we see a number of the PDA athletes who have been beginners last year, looking to convert that beginner status into an intermediate status, and we definitely saw that. So we see a Durham pair out in the middle of the, it's a UL pair out in the middle of the lake, the other colour of purple, doing some pre-paddle ahead of tomorrow. So in the intermediate event, we saw a number of the recent April trialists from the doubles at Caversham taking the start line in what was a massive entry. So some real differences in capability from at the top end. People like Izzy Lancaster and Louise Brooks, who finished 1st and 2nd in the time trial, all the way back to an F final. And even with all that, there were 23 athletes eliminated and 6 who had scratched. Amongst the 6 who had scratched were a number of PDA athletes who we'd often expect to see in the AB finals. So Jess Simons, one of them, who is off to Syracuse next year, didn't take the start. But I think it just underscores the size of that entry. Lancaster and Brooks, 1 and 2 in the time trial. The B final was a 1-2-3 for PDAs across the country. So Tolu from the southwest, Ursi Fleming from East Midlands, and Meg Luddington from the Northwest, doing a 1-2-3. Tolu was at Caversham for April trials in a double with Brooks, and I think probably wanted to be in that A final, it would be fair to say. But she's only in her second year of rowing, right? So we can't criticise her too much for winning the B final of intermediate singles and getting to April trials in her second year of rowing. And I'm going to talk about Tolu and her rise and how that may relate to someone else, Chloe Bernard, later on. In the A final, Lancaster easily converted her time trial pace into a win in what was a Reading 1-2-3. Louise Brooks from Leeds didn't manage to convert the pace of the time trial into a podium spot. However, Reading are obviously a programme with great strength, but also regularity and daily competition. And while Brooks has got a huge amount of benefit and a lot of individual attention in the PDA system, what she doesn't have in Leeds is a regular sparring partner who's able to go toe-to-toe with her side by side and kind of give her that competition. But she's had a fantastic experience through the PDA, and she's graduating this year and moving on to the University of Washington. So I think, much like Ben Newton, who was a standout athlete from the Performance Development Academy in Yorkshire and had to move to Oxford Brookes for the next experience to progress, Louise is now at a similar point. She performs well on the ergometer. She clearly moves the boat well, but with a bit of a squad around her, will that give her, as Coach Dan Harris, PDA fame, often says, the right experience at the right time to develop? So yeah, let's see what happens with Brooks when she makes that move. On to another sculling event now, and I'm going to canter through because yesterday so many of you watched about 8 minutes and then realised that maybe I waffled on, so I'm going to try to make headway on beginner doubles. And I think everybody knew that it was going to be the Loughborough show based on what we saw in beginner singles, and that did not disappoint. 1 and 2 in the time trial, and then into the A final, 1 and 2 again. Interesting to note was Chloe Bernard, who is obviously a female athlete racing up in the open event in the B crew, taking the silver medal, much like Tolu did last year in racing up in championship quads. I think, in open quads, beginner quads last year. I think she also did an open beginner double last year. We're seeing a similar thing from Barnard this year. I believe she's in the Loughborough beginner quad tomorrow. No, sorry, that was yesterday. I'm confusing myself. However, what are we seeing? We're seeing the rise of someone here with interesting talent. And that's why I like the beginner events, because they can show someone on their ascendancy. And looking at her on the medal podium today, she was full of smiles, clearly very confident, clearly really enjoying her sport. And that's an absolute credit to the coaches who have inspired her to get to this point and are creating an atmosphere around her and her Loughborough colleagues who are looking forward to continuing to develop. So with more beginner events to come tomorrow. Yes, it is open beginner quads tomorrow. It was women's beginner quads yesterday when Barnard was in the Seaboat, but I believe she's in the open beginner quads tomorrow, and it would be a brave man or woman or person who would bet against Loughborough. So if there is a bookie in Nottingham taking bets, get down there now, see what the odds are. The other safe bet of the day, I think, was the women's beginner 4, and it always looked like it was going to go Edinburgh's way, and it did. What's increasingly becoming a safe bet is seeing Sheffield do well in beginner events or in development events. We saw them again, I think it was placing 4th in the C final of women's intermediate 8s just now. and they continued to show that form in the beginner events earlier in the day also. Right, let's move on to some male events in the open and intermediate fours, coxed fours today. And whilst an important event in itself for the British Universities title, it is also important in the domestic calendar because this is where we start to see things that are brewing ahead of the jewel in the crown of Henley Royal Regatta, and the student events there being the Temple Challenge Cup and Prince Albert for coxed fours. In the championship event, BUCS dominating in the time trial. In repechage 1, Imperial College and Oxford qualified, with Oxford BUCS B being knocked out. And in the second, it was a strong Newcastle 4 edging another strong 4 from Durham. And at this point, I noted in my notebook, I thought, might Angelo from Newcastle starting to bethink that maybe his fortunes and the fortunes of the men's sweep squad this year may be more aligned to the PA. We've seen the Newcastle Championship 8 and it didn't qualify for the A final yesterday. And I just wonder, looking at the coxed 4, whether they have more talent, more concentration of talent that will allow them to convert the coxed 4 into their best potential result. I'm sure he won't decide yet. I'm sure he'll go away, but I imagine that will be not just on his minds, but the minds of the athletes as they return to the Northeast after racing tomorrow and build into the Metropolitan Regatta, which is in a few weeks' time. But yeah, so they seem to be outperforming their opposition, and the bellwether sort of like Bristol, the Bristol 8 having beaten Newcastle throughout the year. The Newcastle 4, however, is going faster than Bristol, and it seems to be mixing it up more with Durham and others. So that's good to see for the Blue Star, if you are that way, if you are the Blue Star inclined. In the final, it was BUCS who edged out a really strong-looking Durham crew. So while Angelo might be favouring the PA, maybe Fletch up at Durham will be doing likewise. I commented yesterday about how well the Durham 8 looked, but how long and elegant it looked on the front end compared to a really punchy, direct place and push from BUCS. Today, that Durham crew was on at the front, hooking it up, and you could really see the surge and directness. So I don't know whether there was something mentioned overnight, or maybe they've just been specialising a bit in fours, or the loading style suits them more. Who knows? But it was something that stood out to me, and that was a really good thing to see. Edinburgh made the B final. So yesterday I commented on maybe the programme, which in the past is often decided, like I suggested with Newcastle, that the opportunity lay in the PA. Maybe they were going to have a stronger coxed 4, but they finished in the B final, overall in 9th position. So it doesn't seem like the Edinburgh have that card to play this year either, but they do seem to have a quad. So we'll see what happens when that pans out. The quad could be an interesting option because they do have a couple of under-23 trialists, and supporting some crew boat sculling might not be a bad thing for Josh and the likes. In the B final, it was Newcastle, Durham, Oxford BUCS, London, Oxford, and Bristol. No, sorry, that's the intermediate event. I've given it away. But the A final of the intermediate event was BUCS, and again Durham in second place. So showing that strong direct front end, loading up really nicely in the coxed 4. Who knows? Maybe there's a theme emerging here. UL, 2 BUCS crews, and then Bath again. Bath in an A final this time of an intermediate event, mixing it up. So maybe, well, they have spot for choice, really. Will they have a go at the Temple, or will they have a go at the PA? Maybe they'll have a go at both. And the next page is blank. So I really struggled to think about what 3 things am I going to focus on today. So I focused on a multitude of events. What are the big themes? Well, the other theme being that they're pumping the Portaloos again, which seems to be something I'm walking towards in these bloggy vloggy things. So I need to stop doing that. Let's turn this way and look at some doubles doing start practicing out on the lake. What are the themes that are emerging? Well, winner of the day, you've got to say it's a tough call between, is it Katie Mole in her comeback? Is it Chloe Barnard in what's proving a bit of a breakout year? I don't know. We're seeing some good results for Newcastle in the Championship Coxed 4, which shows maybe there's some opportunities for the Blue Star Club to move on from there. And I think we're also seeing the importance of aligning with expert regional coaches and the Loughborough programme doing that with East Midlands PDA and how that's supporting them. We're also seeing some really interesting stories emerge in the kind of midfield for the intermediate events and how that might pan out for Student 8's aspirational academic events at Henley Women's Regatta and the Island Challenge Cup as well at the faster end of things with Henley Royal Regatta. I think the Development Fours event for Henley Women's Regatta looks like it might be another Edinburgh show. They are traditionally a high performer in that event. I think they've won it for the last 2, maybe 3 years. I'm sure someone in the comments will point out to me if I have that wrong. So lots of interesting stories from day 2. Looking forward to day 3. Beginner quads is going to be one to watch. I think Loughborough are likely to romp home. I'm going to enjoy seeing what can be done in the Open Championship pairs event. There seems to be many crews out here pre-paddling this evening, and that is typically a good event to watch. And in women's doubles, which are again on tomorrow, we've got Championship and Inter. Reading will continue that form, but there are always a few PDA doubles seeking to break up the Reading University flotilla that often occupies the central lanes. I'll leave you with another thought at the end of the day. How good is it to see Oxford Brookes University doing well after a difficult year last year with changes in coaching staff, and I'm not going to go into any of the details around that. I understand there's some relationship challenges between the club and the university itself, but the athletes are focused, and that's a testament to their drive, their ambition, their tenacity. All of those words mean the same thing, but also their emotional maturity. That's good to see, but also see them sculling. In the intermediate event, we saw some promising looking scullers today in the intermediate quads, and that can only be a good thing. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why we saw the general standard of intermediates quad events so high compared to the championship quads. Right, so lots to enjoy. If you are around tomorrow on a bank holiday in Nottingham, come and watch. It's all good. And have a good evening. From the Rowing Notebook, cheerio.